This episode contains descriptions of violence and may not be appropriate for all audiences. Listener discretion is advised. Previously on The Girl with the Same Name. In the early hours of February 8, 2002, in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, a 911 call was placed reporting a vehicle on fire outside of George Warhola's scrap metal yard. The fire department responded to the call in the sparsely inhabited area, located on the north side of the Allegheny River. There, in the empty parking lot leased by the nearby Heinz ketchup factory for the employees' daytime parking, they encountered a vehicle engulfed in a raging fire. When they put out the blaze, they discovered the body of popular local bartender Jamie Stickle. And although her death was labeled suspicious by the Pittsburgh Police Department, the Allegheny County Coroner's Office found her manner of death to be undetermined. My name is Jamie Stickle, and a short time after the other Jamie lost her life in that fire, I found out about her story. For 22 years, I have hoped from afar to learn that Jamie's case had been resolved, that her death was reclassified as a homicide, that her killer had been brought to justice. But for 22 years, nothing has changed, and her case has gone cold. So now, my partner and I have taken up Jamie's investigation. We are speaking to her family, her friends, her co-workers, the police, the coroner, and anyone who can help us know better who Jamie Stickle was before she came to her untimely and tragic end, and to get to the root of what may have happened to her that fateful night. This is The Girl with the Same Name. In the last episode, we heard a clip from a 2019 KDKA interview where Joe Myers, the lead detective on Jamie Stickle's case, describes what he thinks happened to her.
My personal theory is that there was someone within the gay community that she had a problem with, and there was some, we'll call it outside or out of the area, people brought in to assault Jamie.
Somebody that she had a problem with. I can't emphasize it enough when I say that Jamie was popular. In the many interviews we've conducted over the past year, the one thing that we've heard over and over and over is that Jamie Stickle was loved and that she loved big in return.
She was a great friend.
She was just like the best person and personality-wise, you know? You could always count on her, I never personally had to, it was like, we all took care of each other.
She was a wonderful and beautiful person that had the biggest heart of anyone I've ever met.
One of those people that you never think you're going to ever have to deal with.
Mm-hmm.
Of course.
And just with her basically being such a good person and very giving. I mean, she would have given you the shirt off your back if she got to know you.
Yeah.
And it's as you said, Jamie, it's a real shitty thing that happened.
Yeah. So who would do this? Who would so cruelly and violently take the life of such a beloved person who seems to have been universally admired? Or is that even what happened? Dr. Elareza Shakir, the forensic pathologist who performed Jamie's autopsy, was not able to determine if her manner of death was a homicide and left it as undetermined. In one of our conversations with Detective George Sattler of the Pittsburgh Police Department's inactive case unit, he mentioned to us that many detectives over the years have gone back and forth with their personal theories about whether Jamie's death was a murder or an accident, whether this was done to her by one person or more, or if she was alone and somehow did it to herself. Detective Sattler was of the opinion that this was likely a homicide and was probably carried out by two individuals, a theory in keeping with the one expressed by Joe Myers. Dr. Cyril Wecht, one of the world's preeminent forensic pathologists, happened to be the head coroner elected by the people of Allegheny County when Jamie died, and while he did not personally conduct her autopsy, it was performed by a trusted member of his staff. Dr. Wecht, who has consulted on a number of high-profile deaths, including John F. Kennedy, Robert F. Kennedy, Sharon Tate, Elvis Presley, and JonBenet Ramsey, to name just a few, consulted with us on Jamie Stickle's case and explained to us all the possible manners of death.
Manner of death, there are 5 possibilities: natural, accident, suicide, homicide, or undetermined.
Jamie's death was certainly not natural, so that possibility is off the table. And while Jamie had experienced great sadness during her recent breakup from her live-in girlfriend, Jamie Cervone, also known as Little Jamie, no one thinks that her death was a suicide. And we have not encountered any theories to that effect. So that leaves 2 possibilities: accident or homicide. And when the determination between the 2 cannot be made, it is left as undetermined. And for the first 2, accident or homicide, we've heard quite a few theories put forth. When the story of Jamie Stickle's death was featured in an episode of The Trail and Cold, a popular true crime podcast that explores unsolved deaths, online sleuths from all over the internet began expressing their opinions and sharing their ideas of how this terrible event could have transpired. A Reddit user going by the moniker Chip Lady seems to doubt that this may have been an accident, but for the sake of argument, they played out how such an accident might have occurred. Here's Chip Lady's post as read by actor Amber Faith.
I think there's some slim possibility of it being a tragic accident. She was at 3 times the legal limit, which is totally possible to do on your own and still function, which means something illogical or unreasonable might have made plenty of sense to her at the time. It's far-fetched, but I think just as reasonable as assuming someone put a hit out on her. With her blood alcohol content, any series of unfortunate events could have happened. Personally, I think if it was an accident, it would have started with a cigarette blowing back into the car, landing on something, and started smoldering, probably as she arrived or was very near her home. Then that hit something flammable she'd spilled, maybe alcohol, and things spiraled down from there.
They address the blood outside the vehicle and personal effects on the ground as follows.
Maybe she tripped going to her apartment and injured herself, which could explain the blood and her belongings being scattered about. Maybe she returned to the Jeep to get help. She thought she forgot something in the car, or because she noticed the fire and thought she could put it out. Or maybe she'd already gone into her apartment, put her work keys up, and decided to head to another party and fell while leaving. Once she was in the Jeep for whatever reason, maybe a mix between her blood alcohol content and smoke inhalation made her pass out, and unfortunately not get out of the burning car.
This is not the only accident theory we encountered, but it was probably the most cohesive one, and it is worth noting that the author of this post expressed their own doubt in the likelihood of this being an accidental death. Another version of the accidental death theory came from Detective Sattler, who again was not expressing his own belief, but was attempting to demonstrate that the possibility of an accidental death perhaps could not yet be dismissed. Due to Pittsburgh Police Department regulations, Detective Sattler could not allow us to record our conversation, but the hypothetical he expressed was that Jamie's Jeep may have ignited on its own as a result of an electrical issue. It's possible that she arrived home safely and may even have gotten into her apartment, and from outside the car, she could have noticed that the vehicle was on fire. Then, in an attempt to put out the fire, she may have returned to the vehicle, entered it, and became overcome by the carbon monoxide, knocking her unconscious, and then finally succumbing to the fire itself. We need to address that the arson investigators determined the fire started outside the vehicle per news reports at the time. According to Detective Sattler and confirmed by Dr. Cyril Wecht, anyone, even someone severely injured, would not be able to ignore a blaze so intense they would fight to get out of the vehicle. It lacks logic that Jamie would enter her burning vehicle to put out a fire. And put out the fire with what? There was no hose, no water, no fire extinguisher reported as being found at the scene. So the very idea or theory that she had been attempting to put out a fire inside the vehicle seems highly unlikely. You may be listening to these theories and think they seem pretty implausible. But unless the possibility of an accidental death can be eliminated, then the medical examiner is unable to make a determination, and the manner of death remains undetermined. And that is where Jamie's case is stuck. Let's take a look at some of these ideas. First, let's talk about Jamie's blood alcohol content. It was pretty high at 0.225%, which is 2.8 times the legal limit to drive in Pittsburgh. So yeah, Jamie had quite a lot to drink that night. But let's put that in context. Jamie Stickle was a professional bartender, and consumption of alcohol was a part of her regular routine. Again, here's Dr. Wecht.
That's a high level, but not enough to kill you. And if you are accustomed to any drinking at all, it would not even lead to unconsciousness. It would lead to compromise of motor and sensory activity, but it would not lead to death. And I do not believe in someone who has had occasional drinks before would not lead to unconsciousness and death by itself.
And what about her passing out from carbon monoxide? The autopsy report showed that her carbon monoxide blood level was only at 16% saturation, which alone is not enough to kill, nor is it enough to render a person unconscious. However, according to Dr. Wecht,
the alcohol and the CO together are both central nervous system depressants.
Yes.
Working together, they could lead to a state of subconsciousness. But I don't think together those two would produce death. 0.225 alcohol and a 0.16 CO. I don't think that those two acting in concert would have led to death.
Okay, I'm going to say a lot of things here, so stay with me. I'm going to go slow. So that leaves the question of whether Jamie was rendered unconscious by the combination of alcohol and carbon monoxide in her blood. And while we don't have a definitive answer here, we would like to present one more fact for consideration. Her carbon monoxide level was 16% when she stopped breathing. If she passed out, that means she continued to breathe and would have continued to inhale smoke and carbon monoxide in her state of unconsciousness. Therefore, at whatever point she passed out, her carbon monoxide level was likely lower than 16%, though we could only guess how much lower. But the lower it was, the less likely it becomes that she passed out from the carbon monoxide at all, leaving the alcohol as the primary nervous system depressant at the initial moment of unconsciousness, which Dr. Wecht has indicated would have been unlikely for even a casual drinker. But Jamie Stickle was not a casual drinker. She was a 150-pound professional bartender who was known to be able to handle her liquor and who had already driven herself home that night. Now, let's discuss the idea that Jamie may have accidentally lit her own car on fire with a cigarette. We asked a number of Jamie's friends about this.
I remember during the investigation people saying, well, maybe it was a cigarette or something that started the fire. Jamie didn't smoke.
No, I don't ever recall her smoking cigarettes.
No clear memories of her smoking cigarettes, no.
You get the idea. And Jamie's sister Julie also confirmed that Jamie did not smoke cigarettes. So it seems unlikely, or at least inconsistent, that Jamie would have had cigarettes on her person and would have been smoking in her car on the way home. Admittedly, we cannot rule out the possibility based on this unlikelihood. So whose pack of cigarettes were found outside Jamie's car? Another issue with Reddit user Chip Lady's accidental death theory is the idea that the discarded cigarette or rogue ember landed on a combustible substance that may have been spilled in the back of Jamie's car. According to news reports, arson investigators from both the Pittsburgh Police Department and from the insurance company investigated the vehicle and were not able to find any evidence of any accelerants used. We are not certain, but presumably a fire started in such a way would leave evidentiary burn marks that would have been identifiable to professional arson investigators. Unfortunately, at this time, we still have not been able to secure anything more from the Pittsburgh Police Department than the initial, mostly blank, newly generated incident report. Without access to additional information, which we are continuing to solicit and appeal for, it is not currently possible for us to completely rule out that Jamie's death was some sort of accident. That brings us to a primary issue that we have encountered. I think we are all familiar with the concept of reasonable doubt.
If there's a reasonable doubt in your minds as to the guilt of the accused, a reasonable doubt, then you must bring me a verdict of not guilty. Now, if, however, there's no reasonable doubt, then you must, in good conscience, find the accused guilty.
Yep, we sort of had to include a clip from the movie 12 Angry Men. Not only is it a classic, but it perfectly encapsulates the idea I think we all have about our system of justice. That it is based on this idea of reasonable doubt, that holding juries or judges or police or medical examiners to a stricter standard would be untenable and would create an environment in which very little could ever be accomplished. We were on our flight back from Pittsburgh when this idea jarred us, so we called up Dr. Wecht as soon as we got back to Los Angeles to ask him.
Well, you have the 5 manners of death to consider, and you review them, and you review and eliminate one after the other.
The call quality isn't great, and it's difficult to understand what Dr. Wecht is saying. So here's Jason reading a transcript of Dr. Wecht's part of the call.
Well, you have the 5 manners of death to consider, and you review them and you eliminate one after the other, and see what you come up with. And then, if you feel you can state that opinion with a reasonable degree of medical certainty, then you arrive at that conclusion, and you eliminate the other manners.
To clarify, there's not a burden of irrefutable proof to determine if a death was a homicide rather than undetermined?
No, it's not at the 100%.
No, it's not that it has to be 100%, but there has to be a reasonable degree of certainty, and you have to have eliminated the others as reasonable possibilities.
We now find ourselves weighing these two components of determination, a reasonable amount of certainty and eliminating other possibilities. I am not a doctor, and I'm certainly not a medical examiner, but I know nuance, and that is one of the most nuanced answers I think I've ever received. If one is able to eliminate all other possibilities, that doesn't leave you with a reasonable amount of certainty. It leaves you with absolute certainty, because there's only one viable option remaining. So which is it? Reasonable certainty or absolute certainty? And what will it take to get there? When speaking to Jamie Stickle's friends, it doesn't take much at all. People who are willing to talk feel absolutely certain about what happened to her.
I mean, I'm certain that Sonny killed her.
That's Ryan Wetzel talking, and the Sonny he is referring to is Sonia Sonny Verasso, owner of the Tilden nightclub, which is located above the 941 Saloon, formerly known as the Liberty Avenue Saloon, where Ryan was a bartender, though he was not working there the night that Jamie died.
I don't know that I think that Sonny did it herself. I can see, Sonny those two getting into a fight. But my thought was always that they had gotten into a fight, and Sonny either had someone else go beat her up because she was mad at her about the shared girlfriend that they were fighting over, or if they'd gotten into a fight that discontinued and someone's temper was just too much. Like I said, Jamie was nice, but Jamie was a bartender downtown in a rough neighborhood. I mean, nobody would take her out easily. There would have been a fight. This isn't someone that you could smack around, punch, and walk away from. This isn't someone that you would like abuse and get away with it. If someone attacked in any way, she would have fought, and it would have been, if you walked away, for someone to walk away from it, someone would have been unconscious.
Ryan also shared another rumor he had heard about his old boss at the Liberty Avenue Saloon, Tony Rubino, who was one of the last people to see Jamie Stickle alive.
There were also rumors at the time that Tony had something to do with it. And a few years later than that happened, it's the behavior that Tony demonstrated then, or the way he behaved then, like a few years after this, how he was really messed up and on, drugs all the time and not just occasionally. That person that Tony became, that was definitely strung out, he was definitely an addict. I could see that person becoming violent and doing something. At the time of Jamie's death, Tony wasn't like that.
It is worth noting that Tony is the only person we are aware of who was ever taken into police custody for questioning about Jamie Stickle's death. However, he was released shortly afterwards. The police did seize his clothing, and according to him, they never returned them. We thought that was interesting, so we spoke to Sergeant Brandon Roy, an expert in law enforcement procedures and tactics.
It seems like they would be testing his clothes for accelerants.
Uh-huh.
That'd be my guess.
Okay.
Seizing clothing is, when was he brought in relation to the car fire?
I would say it was probably the next day.
The next day. Okay. So to seize the clothing that he's wearing, they probably suspected or had some information to suggest that the clothing was the same from the night before, or from the night when he had contact with her, or the night that he had contact with the, alleged contact with the car or accelerants. Taking clothing is a common practice. It's like any other piece of evidence. If you suspect that it's involved in your incident, you take clothing. Clothing is really, really good at holding on to things like trace amounts of accelerants, DNA of the other party, hairs, fibers. It's really common in like a shooting case or another stabbing case. Like blood spatter patterns can show proximity of the suspect from the victim. You can have gunshot residue on both victim and suspect that shows proximity. But in this case, with an arson case of the car and a homicide, it would be my guess that it was to check for accelerants.
Since the police released Tony and he was never brought up on charges, it seems likely that his clothing was found to be free of accelerants, blood spatter, or any other physical evidence tying him to Jamie Stickle's murder.
I believe it was a hit.
That's Eileen Halloran, a friend of Jamie's.
I believe somebody, I don't necessarily know that the person that performed the malicious act would definitely have been someone that we know, but I think that someone we know may have asked for it to be done. It was an eerie feeling to think that someone amongst us, may have something to do with it, or at least some knowledge of it, like what actually did happen. It's kind of, we have it's pretty rather small, I mean, in hindsight, it's a rather small community, a rather small network of people that all hung out together. And, to think that any of us could be involved makes you kind of feel like strange around other folks that you've been comfortable about before. And then like at my, bar or happy hour, people would ask a bunch of questions. And did we find out anything? Or, someone would come in with a newest scoop of what they thought. And it's just, I don't think anybody particularly knew, but a lot of people pointed the finger at Sunny. And I think because of like her, supposed affiliation with the mob and, or, she knows people and could kind of be like a hard ass for less of a nice, word, but she just came off as like a real, tough person. And, people, I think some people may have feared her. I don't know why, but I never really did.
This is Melanie. She's asked us not to use her last name.
Everybody thinks Sunny did it. She hired somebody. She's sketchy.
Yeah.
Well, because she's the one that took up with little Jamie. I know Sunny had somebody do it. I know she did.
Yeah.
And every one of you talk to is going to tell you the same thing. Sunny didn't do it. She had somebody do it for her. We all know it. Nobody can prove it.
We've been trying to get a hold of Sunny Verasso. We have several emails for her, but they've all bounced back or garnered no reply. We found a number for her, so Jason, our senior producer, tried calling.
Your call has been forwarded to an automated voice messaging system. Is not available. At the tone, please record your message. When you've finished recording, you may hang up or press 1 for more options.
Hello, this message is for Sonia Verasso. My name is Jason Bieber, and I am the senior producer on a new investigative podcast that is telling the story of Jamie Stickle, her 2002 passing. We're looking into telling the story of her life and also of her death and the events that followed. You can reach me or any member of my team at area code 412-822-6123. We understand that you knew her and that you were the owner of the Tilden and the building where the 941 Saloon is, and we were hoping to speak to you about it. Again, Jason Bieber, and our number once more is 412-822-6123. We would very much like to speak with you either over the phone, by Zoom, or our team will be traveling to Pittsburgh next month, and we would love the opportunity to meet you in person. Thanks so much.
We haven't heard back from her. So, Sunny, if you are listening, we would really like to hear from you and to give you the opportunity to tell your part of this story. You can reach us at that number or at thegirlwiththeSameName@gmail.com. We may not get the opportunity to speak with Sunny directly, but someone else did.
I don't know if you know, like, the whole story about what happened in the...
You're hearing the voice of Andrea Maynard, a friend and patron of Jamie Stickle's.
I still, like... It's still hard for me to, like, wrap my head around it. It's just horrible, but, I was the one who confronted Sunny.
And we will hear how that conversation went next time on The Girl with the Same Name. If you enjoy The Girl with the Same Name, please take a moment right now to subscribe to the podcast and leave us a review. It would really help us out. You can follow the show on Instagram, Threads, and Facebook at The Girl with the Same Name. And you can sign up for the mailing list on our website, thegirlwiththesamename.com. This is an ongoing investigation. If you have any information about Jamie Stickle's life or death, we want to hear from you. Please call our tip line at 412-822-6123 or send us an email to thegirlwiththesamename@gmail.com, or you can call the Pittsburgh Police tip line at 412-323-7800. If you have photos, video, or audio recordings of Jamie, you can send them to us or share them on social media and tag the show at The Girl with the Same Name. The Girl with the Same Name is a production of Make That Paper Productions. I am your host, Jamie Stickle. This episode was researched, written, and produced by myself and Jason Bieber, and our assistant producer is Madison Westenheiser. The show was edited and sound designed by Jason Bieber. Chloe Naffey and Morgan Manfredo were our interns. The original theme song was composed and recorded by Brian Hendricks. Additional music and sound effects are from freesounds.com or were generated using Songburst AI. We would like to thank the following people who generously contributed their time and expertise. Our legal counsel is Amanda Moghadam. We received private investigation assistance from Lori Rokenbeck. Our law enforcement advisor is Sergeant Brandon Roy, and Superfan Promotions did our publicity. We'd like to send an enormous thank you to all our Kickstarter supporters. Without your contributions and belief in our work, we would not have been able to tell Jamie's story. Thank you. And special thanks go out to Parvesh China, Brian Assman, George Leon, Daniel Alexander, Jim Shepard, Grant Wood, Stephen Skoblick, and April Cass.